Hello, I'm Megs Reynolds with the Do MoreAgriculture Foundation. We are the national voice and champion for mental health in Canadian agriculture. And joining me today is Landon Waite from the Head and Heart, Saskatchewan. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
And I want you to introduce Head and Heart Saskatchewan and tell us about why you funded it. And that's going to get us into our conversation.
Cool. Yeah, so Head and Heart is a pretty important thing to me. It's a youth mental health organization nonprofit organization that I created in tribute of my sister, who I lost to suicide back in 2010. So yeah, all proceeds of sales will go back into mental health initiatives around the province of Saskatchewan and into the schools. So yeah, more or less a tribute and just to raise awareness for mental health and yeah, get it into the youth because that's when I struggle with things. So that is my goal.
Well, it's very amazing that you're doing that, and I'm very sorry for your loss. Was she a youth at the time?
She was 21 when she passed away. Yeah.
Okay. So you've already mentioned that you've lost someone. How do you feel, and with the work that you're doing and, mentioning starting working with youth, how do you feel that stigma played into what your sister was going through, when you started dealing with mental health as a youth, that whole piece?
For sure. I think that's a super good and important question. Coming from a small community and from Rosetown, there's not a lot of resources around for anything like that. And I remember, when I was a youth and going to school, mental health was never talked about. It was never a thing. It wasn't, you'd have presentations and people would come in, but there was never a mental health presentation on someone that was struggling with mental health or someone that, if of any of that magnitude. So yeah, I think for me, it was super important to, kind of start something like that. But like I said, in a small town, Saskatchewan, we farm just outside of Rosetown as well. That's kind of like the small agriculture community way. It's kind of like you put your head down and work through it and figure it out on your own. That's kind of how we were taught to do as a youth. I know, especially like I said, growing up on a farm, that is what we were taught. If you have a problem, you figure it out yourself and you deal with it. Sure, your parents were there for a conversation, but it wasn't an open conversation about it.
Right.
And the stigma surrounding a small community too, right? It's, you don't want anyone to know that you're struggling. Yeah, we all are human and will struggle, but it's pretty tough to say to someone that, hey, I'm not doing good. You don't want anyone not to know that you're not doing good, right? And once again, with a small community too, word gets around that, so and so is struggling, or this happened to so and so, and you don't want people maybe outside of your friend group or close knit group. You don't want people maybe knowing that, and it's tough in a small community. And yeah, like I said, it wasn't talked about growing up, and then I think as that has progressed, it's still not talked about enough. There's breaking down barriers and there's progress, but it's still there's still that stigma that's surrounding it.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't grow up in a rural community. I grew up in the city, but it still wasn't something we were taught in school or that we learned about. And we are talking about it now. Like me and you are sitting here having this conversation, which is incredible. And what I've noticed in the farming community is we are having the conversation. It's hard to go to a trade show or something where there isn't a piece involving mental health and agriculture, but it's still very much the response of, yes, I support mental health. I'm glad we're talking about it. I wouldn't ever need help. I don't ever need to talk to somebody, but it's good we're talking about it, right? Yeah. And so to me, that shows that I think maybe we've made more progress on the external stigma piece, where we're more open as a community to acknowledging that there is mental health and we might be struggling at times and we might need help at times, but that internal piece of, well, I'm never going to have problems, or it's, I don't have anything that I need to deal with. I feel like that is the scariest piece, and it's so hard to address because, the farming community I was in, we lost somebody to death by suicide, and they had so much support around them. But I think it was that internal stigma piece where they were not able to, and ultimately that person needs to get to a place where they're able to, and acknowledgement and acceptance is very different when you're looking at realizing that you need help. Do you feel like internal stigma played into what your sister was going through?
100%. Yeah. Like I said, it wasn't really anything known to our family. It kind of came out of the blue. Looking back, was there signs? For sure. But we'd never been through it. Even in the community, there wasn't really, anything that I can think of or remember that, someone having death by, or like being death by suicide, and it was, like I said, shocking to the community and everyone, but not only as yourself as a female, but for a male, being vulnerable is terrifying. Like it's, like I said, to admit you're not doing good in front of your peers or someone, that is terrifying. And I know for my sister, like I said, to admit as a human being that you're struggling, it's not a easy thing to do. And I don't, as I can recall, like remember my sister really admitting, like, hey, I'm not doing good.
Mhm.
So like I said, it definitely came to a shock when she was diagnosed with depression, for sure.
Mhm. Well, and we don't, going back to not learning about things, not talking about things, we don't know what the signs are or what flags are, what symptoms are until we know, right? Until we do, yeah, some of the learning pieces, and having this conversation is a great starting place, and just getting information out there. How did, I haven't personally gone through this, but I feel that the grieving process to losing a loved one to death by suicide would be different than losing a family member or a loved one to a different type of accident or something else. How did you walk through that process, and what did you do to support yourself and your family through that?
Yeah, honestly, like still grieving from it. And it's, like I said, that happened in 2010. It's a bit of an emotional roller coaster for sure. But yeah, like I said, when I first started that process, it wasn't good. Like I said, I was going into my grade 12 year here at the high school in Rosetown, and I remember like walking into school and literally like, school of 350 to 400 kids. I walked in the school for my first day back, as I had missed like the first 3 or 4 days, and it was just like you felt like all eyes were on you. Like I said, it was terrifying. Honestly, it was like, now I'm that kid that his sister committed suicide, and that's how I was viewed. People didn't want to say anything. People didn't want to have, a conversation. And honestly, at that point, if someone would have said something, I probably would have broke down. Yeah, as the days go on, things do get easier. Yeah, you're always gonna think about it and grieve about it, no matter what happened. But I think just having that, kind of being labeled as, now that person, like I said, as a family member that's committed suicide, you're viewed as different. You're viewed as someone that, someone doesn't want to say anything. And, I think it would be a lot different if someone happened in a car accident. It's a lot easier to say like, well, sorry about the tragedy. I don't think someone would be saying that to me in that situation, which would never, yeah, sure, they would say sorry, but nothing like along those lines. But yeah, when I started my grieving process, like I said, I was in my grade 12 year. I started going to counseling in my grade 12 year. Very close with I have another older sister, my mom, and they kind of pushed me towards like, hey, maybe you should talk to someone, and which was hard because I was a popular kid in school. Did I bully kids? Absolutely, 100%, and I'm not proud of that. To this day, if I could go back and change things, 100%. But I had a lot of pride to put aside, and a lot of masculinity to put aside, and to walk into that counselor's office to this day probably was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Mhm.
Like I said, just for the sake of being vulnerable and putting myself in that position where, like, are you going to listen to what people are going to say about you? You're going to be worried about who says this about you, or are you going to take care of yourself? And that's when, it started for me to, really try and take care of myself and not let things get out of hand and so on and so
Mhm.
forth.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's kind of, it started with me in high school with that. After high school, it kind of fell by the wayside with the counseling. I actually took a job overseas. I worked as a tour guide for a backpacking company, sorry. And so yeah, going from the farm to that was a little bit of a life changer.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I did that for about 3 or 4 years. That was kind of my escape from it all.
I was thinking, was that a bit of an escape piece?
Yeah, that was my escape piece to, like I said, just to get away from it. I, you know, go leave for 6 or 8 months, come home, for seeding or harvest, and then leave right after again. Because like, you come home, it's same small communities. At this point, like I said, so, people look at you differently, even though they say they don't, they do. You know, I always say to my parents and my siblings, you walk downtown and there's a person that you've known your whole life, and they just give you the awkward like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And it was just like, it's just like I said, there's still that stigma that surrounds it, because unfortunately we were that family that had this happen to us, and
And
this is
probably to them, it's not intentional, like, oh, I don't want to talk to them because they've been through that. It's, I don't know how to have a conversation. I don't want to make them feel uncomfortable, and
yeah,
just us staying in our heads, and we need to all try to just get past that. And we're not used to having conversations or touching on things, and so feels awkward. But I think probably everybody's feeling the same thing, and it's always better to have a conversation and to reach out and support someone than to, like you said, just someone you've known your whole life, kind of
yeah.
awkward pass you by, like you're don't really know each other, didn't grow up together.
No, for sure. And I mean, the amount of times I remember like someone back in the day would ask me like, "Oh, like, hey, how you doing?" I give them the old cliche, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm good." Down deep, am I? Absolutely not. But like I said, it's pretty tough for someone to just come out and admit that they are struggling for sure. So yeah, when I was in overseas, like I said, it's been 3 or 4 years since I'd maybe talk about it with my mom and my sister, in a small trust group. And then, yeah, when I was overseas, actually, I had a guy on a trip. I was, I guess, I don't know, 22, 21 at the time. Yeah, we were in Thailand just hanging out, and he came up to me and he's like, "Hey, I have a tattoo on my leg that has my sister's name." He's like, "Can I ask who that tattoo's for? Who's Kylie?" And I said, "Oh, I had a sister that passed away by suicide." And he's like, "I'm going to be honest with you." He's like, "I was struggling pretty bad a couple of weeks ago to the point where I was there." And he said, "I just want to let you know that, you're not alone, whatever you're going through."
Wow.
And from that day, honestly, forward, it was just like, you know what, you need to, someone just was super vulnerable with you and just kind of laid it on the table. Like you got to start being more open about it and talking about it. So yeah, that was kind of like my kickstart to being like, let's kind of put an end to this stigma, and let's work to, make a change more or less.
Yeah. What advice would you have to anybody else who's going through the grieving process? Like, is there something that maybe you came to, or you found a couple years in, or something, we've already touched on, like, don't shy away from having those conversations, especially in the community, and being real with support. But is there anything else that maybe you've learned through this process that you would like to share with others?
Ah, geez, yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, I like, I personally, I really think it's important. Like I said, it's easier said than done to just say, talk about it. And it's not easy. It's a very difficult thing to do, especially in today's society. Yeah, that is a
So
tough.
let me flip that then, on your point of like how hard it is to start talking about it, like when that's what you're going through. So what can everybody else do? Like, what advice would you give everybody else to make it easier for the people that need those conversations and that support?
I think it's important, like especially with like loss itself. You know, whether it's a loss of growing up as a sporting activity or getting fired from a job or so on and so forth, you're going to come across loss in your life in different aspects. And I think those are super important things as they're learning experiences. You learn to deal with loss, but and then with that also it makes those little victories that much better. Yeah, and I think it's important for people to understand that, like, you know, if you have to be better for yourself, and no one is going to help you unless you help yourself. And I think that's super important. Like I said, it's a hard thing to say like, it's like me saying to the person, you need to be better, you need to, you know,
Right.
but it's like, I know, especially for myself, it's like, you know, what you're doing isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what the route you're taking, that's not what I want to do. That's not where I want to be. So like I said, it comes down to being in your hands, but it's more or less whether you want to help yourself or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of sounds crucial and harsh, but it's like, you got to be there, you know, you got to do what's right for you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the themes in all of the conversations we've been having is that end of the day, what it all boils down to is that you need to be aware of what you need, and you need to be able to prioritize those needs to take care of yourself. And that allows you to be in a position to take care of others, and you know, like to look at all the different roles and all the different things that you're doing or want to do, but what you need to do specifically to take care of yourself and to prioritize yourself is going to depend on the individual. But it
Absolutely.
all starts with acknowledging and accepting that something's going on, and then figuring out, okay, what do I need from here? And I think we can all play a role in that, whether that's you and I having this conversation now, or us being more vulnerable in our own lives. And by doing so, what I've noticed is you create space for others to share, and
Yeah.
suddenly it's not so isolating. I think part of that stigma is if people know this, then you feel on this island by yourself. But we're all going through stuff, and if we're not going through stuff in this moment, we're not going to get through life without going through stuff.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I know when I first I actually met a girl overseas. I was in Nicaragua at the time, and I kind of just came out with, you know, hey, I'm going to be vulnerable and start speaking about my story and doing this. Yeah, she asked me, she was working at a school as a counselor. She's like, would you come tell your story at a school? And I was like, hell no, not a chance.
Yeah.
I was terrified. I was like, that's a lot. I don't know if I can do it. She's like, no, like, she's like, because I had a previous conversation with her in Nicaragua about what had happened. She's like, I think it'd be important for young kids to, you know, hear your story and your message and so on and so forth. So yeah, my first school I went to Vermilion, and I do a 40-minute presentation, and nervous, and like, I had a bottle of water, and you wouldn't even have thought it had any water in it. That's how dry my mouth was, just like
Right.
trying to talk and nervous. And I was just like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. Break down a couple times during my presentation. And I always tell a story when I'm in doing presentations now in classrooms or schools around the province. I do my 45-minute long presentation, and there's a kid in the back. He's wearing a John Deere sweater. He's got his arms crossed the whole time. He said, I'm pretty emotional when I finish up. I said, do you guys have any questions? And yeah, there's a couple. And I see this kid put his arm up in the back. I said, yeah. And he sits there and he goes, how many acres you farm? and like I said, to this day, it was like the best thing that could ever happen, because he was just like, yeah, I do a 40-minute presentation on my sister's death and suicide and where I'm at. And yeah, how many acres you farm, he says.
Yeah.
And it was like one of those, it was a good icebreaker, but like I said, one of those things I'll never forget. And like I said, since then I've obviously progressed in presentations. Is now it's like yeah, thing I do to, you know, spread awareness about mental health.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so wonderful. What is there anything that we haven't covered that you feel that you want to touch on or share with people?
I think for myself, like I said, it kind of goes back to the start of our conversation where mental health wasn't spoke about in schools. Like I said, I was young, and that's when it did happen to me. So I think it's, from my point of view, I think it's, you know, it starts there. The conversation can start there. And I think, you know, that's where I really advocate for youth mental health, because like I said, it starts in the school. And if looking back, if maybe I had something knowledge about it, I could have maybe, you know, something could have changed or along those lines. I'm not saying something would have changed, but it's like I said, I didn't have that back in the day, and I wish. I say now to the kids, like, it's very important for you guys to understand this, because, you know, things like this can happen to anybody. As we were, you know, it's not like it was suicide was something that happened in the family or anything along those lines. But like I said, it's my sister, and we have a good family. And I think it's important to realize, like, this physically can happen to anyone. And I think like that's a good message to relay to people. Like, it's not just you because this happened. It's anyone it can happen to, right? You're sick. And I just think it's really important for people to understand that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think there's an image we might create of thinking, you know, if somebody is very depressed and having suicidal thoughts, but there's often times where there's people that you would never know, right?
Yeah.
And you could be very close to that person and you wouldn't know. And we get very good at hiding what we're feeling and what we're going through, especially when we're pulling away from everybody and hiding that pain. And so yeah, I think that's such an important point to touch on, that it could happen to anybody, and how important it is to be having these conversations with the youth, because I mean, they're important building blocks to life, right? To getting through life and being able to have resiliency and go through the ups and downs that happen and are going to happen, but having that understanding of mental health and how they can take care of themselves is so important.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like, with that as well. I always say, like, when I'm in a presentation, like, you know, counseling probably, you know, saved me from going down a bad path or so on and so forth. I say, like, even now, I'm 29 years old, I seek counseling. I wouldn't necessarily say because of where I'm at, but it's good to just kind of get a refresher and talk about it. My way of you know, kind of letting loose or being real with my emotions is going in and doing presentations and talking about it. I would say to kids in school, you know, I take antidepressants every day. It doesn't change who I am, doesn't change how I look, doesn't change who my friends are. All my friends know about it. Like I said, they don't look at me any differently. And I think it's important for people to understand that it's, you know, it's for the better, not like, you know, yeah. And I think that's important too. Like I said, I have no shame speaking about going to counseling or taking medication. Like I said, it's something that I need as a person. And like I said, it doesn't change who I am.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And we just need to normalize that. Like, it'd be great to get to the, you know, where we, especially in agriculture, it's like, oh, I said this to my counselor the other day, right? Where it's just such a normal thing of like, this is what we're doing to take care of ourselves. And there doesn't need to be stigma attached, and it's not a negative thing. It's like your comment of, it doesn't change you as a person. If anything, it makes you a better person because you're more balanced and you're healthy and you're happy. And those are all very good things. We should want that for everybody.
For sure. And then, like, I know in my tight knit group of friends too, I've had a couple guys that went through some things, and said, like, you know, what can I do? What can I said, like, talk to a counselor. No, you know, growing up farm. No, I don't want to talk to a counselor. I'm like, no, seriously, like it's good. Like, it's not, I know it's terrifying, but once you do, it's worth it. And, you know, whether or not he did, I'm not sure. But even just the subject around it was like terrifying, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just got to get past that hurdle.
No, and that's exactly it. It's like I said, it's just like good. Like, you just want to give me a little kick in the butt, and like, just get over there and you'll be good.
Yeah.
No, for
Well,
sure.
Landon, thank you so much for joining us today and for talking about everything and opening up about your experience. Where can people find you if they want to get more information or book a workshop or something?
For sure. Yeah. Our website is headandheartsk.com. We're on Instagram as well. Yeah, that's pretty much all the social handles we rock with as of right now. Pretty low key.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for watching. If you're looking for more information or resources, you can go to our website, domore.ag.